Hi, everyone. It looks like people are already starting to join us. We're going to start right at 6 p.m. So please just be patient. We're going to present on DACA today, and afterward, we will have time for general questions about the DACA program, Advance Parole, and maybe some other things that people are wondering about. So like I said, we will start right at 6 p.m. We are also going live on Facebook. Just a reminder to all of our audience members, if you're going to ask questions in the chat, please do not divulge any personal information in the chat. This is a public forum, so many people on Zoom and then on Facebook and later on our YouTube platform will have access to any comments made. So please keep that in mind. Thank you so much. Brilliant. So we are just about to start. If our panelists could turn their cameras on. In a second, I'm about to begin our presentation. As people begin to fill in, we will have some time at the end for questions. So maybe if somebody misses some information, they can get a brief catch up afterward. This presentation will be fully available on our Facebook page, ics.pdx, and it will also be available on our YouTube. So if you have friends or family members that possibly couldn't attend, you can always link them to the presentation afterward. Isaac, are you there? Brilliant. So we are right at 6. Thank you all so much for being here, to our folks connecting through Zoom and our folks connecting through Facebook. We're very excited to be here with you all sharing this important information regarding the DACA program. We know that the current immigration status and like the current process to attain status in the US leaves a lot of families in uncertainty. And that's why we believe it is our responsibility and our duty to keep hosting these sessions, to keep providing this information in order to ensure that our community members have access to trustworthy and correct information regarding the immigration process. Today, we will be focusing on DACA. However, on our Facebook page and our YouTube, you are able to access different presentations on Know Your Rights and other aspects of the immigration process. So please feel free to check those out. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two presenters today, Mr. Selby Abraham and Isaac Ali. Selby and Isaac are two, oh, sorry, loud noise. Isaac and Selby are two attorneys with ICS. They have been in the field for years. Selby works in our general program, so he handles a lot of residency and citizenship and DACA cases. Isaac works within our Equity Corps program, so that's defense cases related to political asylum. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share our presentation, if that's okay with our two panelists. Perfect. Okay, if I can find the presentation on my screen. It's not a presentation without technical difficulties. There we go. There we go. So like I said, we'll be presenting on the DACA program and what it looks like in the year 2021. Selby, if you want to say a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Selby Abraham. I'm an attorney for Immigration Counseling Services in our Portland office, and I work primarily in the General Services program. So I handle a lot of the caseload related to DACA, as well as cases for legal permanent resident status, also known as green card applications, and citizenship.
That's me. Hi, everybody. My name is Isaac. I'm the managing attorney at ICS. Wearing the exact same tie and shirt because why not? Yeah, I'm really happy you're here. I got my start in immigration law actually helping dreamers and DACistas, and I found the work very transformative, and I really enjoyed seeing the many ways people have used DACA as a platform to grow themselves and our community. So I'm very excited to be here tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. And thanks, Isaac. Looking forward to presenting this to all of you this evening. Thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Selby, and I'm an attorney with Immigration Counseling Services. And before we get going, it is important to put forth this disclaimer. We are presenting on the topic of DACA, but everything that you hear tonight should not be considered direct legal advice. It's a general presentation about the DACA program and elements of the DACA program. However, if someone is interested in getting more information about a specific claim or an individual case, our very strong recommendation is to please get in touch with a trusted immigration attorney or accredited representative to seek legal advice and legal assistance with an application. As you can imagine, immigration law is ever changing. It's very much tied to politics, and immigration law and policy goes with the ebbs and tides and flows of policies that come forth between the executive branch of government as well as Congress. And so that is the main motivation that we want to be very specific that this is not legal advice, because when we meet with somebody individually during consultation, we want to do what's best for that person in the moment. Similarly, as Wendy mentioned, we do have an opportunity for questions at the end, and we're happy to entertain them. If there are questions that are very specific about an individual case, Isaac and I might defer to saying that, okay, that sounds very specific to an individual situation. Thank you for the question, but maybe better to do a review of that during an individual consultation. And the reason for that is because the laws are also very complex. There's a lot of factors, elements to it that are going to be applied in different ways to different people. And what we aspire to do as attorneys, and when we do community presentations like this, we know that there's a lot of shared experiences that people want to provide information to one another. But we see a lot in the community that people hear something and then they tell a friend or a neighbor or a family member about it and say, oh, I heard this, you should do that. And that's exactly what we don't want to do. So please be careful about that. And for you or anyone else in your community or personally, please tell them to work with a trusted attorney if they're interested in applying for a benefit or relief before immigration. And again, we will allow for questions at the end, and we're happy to entertain them. And really, between me and Isaac, we're happy to just say, just go ahead and ask the question. If it's a little too specific, we'll let you know. But we're here really as a resource for all of you in attendance. So let's talk a little bit about DACA. There are three main questions that I believe Isaac and I are going to discuss. One, what is the current state of DACA and its current iteration? Two, what are the requirements for applying for DACA, as well as a program called Advance Parole, which is a special permission to travel. And Isaac's going to cover a little bit more about that. And the third question is, what is the outlook for DACA in the near future? Okay, so that's what we aspire to cover during this presentation. I'm going to repeat it one more time. One is, what is DACA in its current form? Two, what are the requirements for someone interested in applying for DACA? And three, what is the outlook for DACA in the near future? And before I jump into this timeline, I do want to say, personally, I have seen DACA just be so transcendent and life-changing. I've helped over 200 clients with DACA applications, and I've seen firsthand the impact that it's had on them and the opportunities that they've created for themselves through this program. I've helped folks who've gone on to become engineers, small business owners, as well as essential healthcare workers, relevant for our time. And so what I've seen is that it's created this upward mobility for folks who've applied for and been able to show eligibility and gain from this program to not just better the lives of themselves, but also their families and their larger community. So the DACA program has a very special place in my heart, and I think very highly of all of the DACA participants that I've helped personally, but also just the community at large. And so I'm happy and excited to talk to all of you about DACA. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the timeline of what the program is and where we are today. And then I'll pass it over to Isaac, who's going to talk more about the intricacies of the application process. So DACA, what does it stand for? It's Consideration for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA program. It allows for a 2-year work permit that one can renew. And it also provides opportunity for a social security card, a real ID for state ID or license, as well as an opportunity to apply for something called Advance Parole, which is a special permission to travel outside of the country. The program it was announced in 2012 through executive order. It's important to know that DACA itself is not legal status, okay? It's not legal status. DACA stands for Deferred Action, which is not the same as a permanent resident card or a pathway to become a citizen. It's just a priority, basically, that immigration has recognized that there are young people who are brought here, sometimes against their will, to the United States. And so long as they've continued a path toward seeking secondary education, then they've allowed for these young people to apply for and gain this 2-year work card. So that's the DACA program. It started in 2012 and it was going along really strong. All these people were applying. And then in 2017, the Trump administration attempted to cancel the program back in September of that year. And the lawsuits ensued soon after, but it did have a practical effect when the cancellation did occur, that immigration, as a result of the lawsuits, decided that they were only going to allow for renewal applications, meaning that those who had applied for DACA previously and gotten DACA can continue to apply. But if someone did not have applied, they did not apply for DACA by September 2017, immigration decided at that point they were not going to accept new applications. So while the lawsuits were pending, immigration, it says USCIS, which stands for United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is an agency of the Government Immigration Office. They're the ones who process DACA applications. So September 2017, they decided, as a result of the lawsuits by order of judge, that they were only going to receive renewal applications, but those who had never applied for DACA, they were out of luck at that point, and they could not process those initial applications at that time. Fast forward, of course, to last year, 2020, there was a big Supreme Court decision that came down that ordered that the decision said that Trump's attempt to cancel the program in 2017 was done improperly. And so he didn't follow the proper protocol in order to try to cancel the program. As a result, by the end of last year, immigration began to accept new applications once again. So we have 3 years from September 2017 to the end of 2020, a whole new group of applicants who had never applied for DACA before, who were waiting and now have the chance to apply for DACA for the first time. And so that's where we are right now, is that DACA is in its current form the way it was when it started back in 2012. One who is eligible and can apply can do so for the first time, and those who've had DACA can continue to renew every 2 years. In a little bit, after I pass it over to Isaac, I'm going to talk more about the current state of DACA leading into the immediate future and what will happen with the DACA program, because there's 2 really important things that are currently pending. One is there's a current lawsuit down in Texas talking about the legality of DACA, which is ongoing, and I'll explain why that's different than the decision from the Supreme Court from last year. And then, of course, we have a new president, and there's been a lot of initiatives put forth to see if we can create a different pathway for folks who have the Deferred Action Program, DACA. And I want to give an update of where we are in terms of congressional intent and action to try and create a different pathway for those who have DACA, so that, like I said, remember, DACA is not actual legal status, but there are a lot of efforts to support folks with DACA to be able to get on a pathway to have some status. So there's a lot happening currently that's pending, that's important to review, but that's kind of where we are at today in this time related to the DACA program. Yeah, I think that's the section I want to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to Isaac, who's going to talk about DACA eligibility and the application process.
Thank you, Selby. Yeah, and I'll go ahead and pick up where you left us. Basically, as Selby pointed out, due to some lawsuits, the DACA program is back on. It's effectively the same criteria it's been throughout the entire time, and I'll be going over some of that criteria with you now. As you can see, there's 7 main points, but there's some nuance that's off the page. The first one is basically that you need to be slightly less than 40 years old or younger. And that will increase here shortly once we hit June. You have to came to the U.S. before reaching the age of 16. You must have resided in the U.S. since 2007, and that was 5 years before the date that this executive order was put into action. The fourth piece is an odd one. It's basically you have to prove you were physically present on a specific day, June in 2012, and that's because that's the date that this whole program went into effect. And to give it legal weight, they needed to have that as an element of an application. Then you'll see the next couple pieces are about education. Long story short, you either must be in school or working towards completing a degree. And then you must also not have any disqualifying crimes. Just to save you some trouble, if you do have criminal history, you still may be eligible for DACA, but that's a situation where you should especially talk to a legal professional so they can give you very specific advice. One danger of applying for DACA is that if you were found not to be eligible, they could refer you to removal proceedings, which is a fancy way of saying deportation court. So you want to make sure you're getting the right advice before you make an application so you don't subject yourself to unnecessary jeopardy. On the other hand, too, some people don't apply when they have relatively minor crimes or even just interaction with the police that doesn't result in a conviction. And they would be eligible, but for applying. And so you also don't want to convince yourself not to apply if you're otherwise eligible. So again, if you have some questions about, your educational status or any type of interaction with law enforcement in the past, definitely talk to an attorney. And I'll go ahead and ask some questions. Now, one thing that comes up frequently when you start working with an attorney or other legal professional is, what kind of evidence do I need to satisfy the government so they can then give me that DACA acknowledgement. And often one of the harder pieces is proving that you have been in the US since 2007. Generally, you want to be able to show on a quarterly basis that you've been present in the US through certain types of business records. So I will go ahead and open up a question to the audience. How many points of evidence do you think you would need on average to successfully prove your DACA claim?
And you guys can drop your answers in the chat.
Should have said that. Thank you, Wendy. All right, dramatic pause over. Approximately 54 points of evidence. That being one every quarter for each year from 2007 to present. Now, I don't want to scare you again because oftentimes one piece of evidence can satisfy several points of evidence. For example, if you have a transcript from school here in the United States, elementary, middle, high school, for example, those often have many points of evidence in them, right? Because you're going to school 9 months out of the year, usually, year after year. Other kinds of worthwhile records, the ones that the government really likes to see, are business records done in the ordinary course of some sort of transaction that doesn't pertain to immigration. So medical records is another good one. Generally, doctors don't put your name in a record unless you actually went to see that doctor. Another great point of evidence is employment records. Again, people don't pay you unless you actually work for them. So those are very strong evidentiary weight. But there are all sorts of secondary forms of evidence that can also be beneficial to your application. But there's different levels of weight depending on which type of evidence it is. And then on the lower end of weight, though it can still be useful, are things like letters from people saying like, yes, this person was here at this time. Maybe that's from like a faith leader or someone you know. Since that is directly for the application and it's not produced as part of a normal business transaction, it's accorded less weight. So that's another situation where you can work with your attorney or other legal professional to figure out which evidence do you need for which point and where the weak points might be. Another thing I've often hear, or I get questions about, I should say, is like, how do I prove that I was in the United States on the exact day of June 15th, 2012? And it's a tough one. I don't know where I was in that specific date. And I would also be challenged to find a piece of evidence that has an exact date on it. So something to keep in mind is something I like to call the goalpost theory. So if you have a piece of evidence from a little before that date and a piece of evidence from a little after that date, it creates a strong inference that you're here between those two dates. In other words, it creates an inference that you didn't just like run out to some other country and come back without anyone noticing in between date A and B. So as you work through your own records and look for evidence, you don't have to have always these specific dates in the records, but you do want to show that you're covering areas of time. And then of course, consult with an attorney and they can show you where there's some weak points and where things can be improved. And yes, thank you, Wendy. DACA is open again. In general, I strongly recommend you apply if you are eligible. As we talked about earlier, DACA has been transformative for many. It opens many doors. And as people advance themselves, they of course advance our entire community, which is a benefit to us all also. And I think somebody will touch on this later. When the DACA program first came out, it was anticipated to be something like an amnesty program or a pathway towards actual permanent status. This was back during President Obama's tenure. Unfortunately, they were not able to reach a consensus and make a statute, which is what you need, a law, to create an actual legal status and then an eventual pathway towards long-term status here in the United States. There is, and there are several bills now in Congress that could create such a pathway, which we all need to fight for. It's unclear which may prevail. And of course, the politics that prevented this transformation from happening in previous administrations still exists, but it does seem to be that our new president and his administration are supporters of this, and there is quite a bit of support in both chambers in Congress. So with luck and actually it's a little sweat equity and just calling people up and advocating, I really hope we can get that promise to come to be. That is, that there is a real pathway for all our dreamers and DACistas to get real status and continue to build up our communities as they have already demonstrated. With that said, I will pass the microphone back to Selby. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to cover this topic as well. Advance parole. This is a benefit that comes along with DACA. Advance parole is a travel permission one time to leave the US and come back again. It is a often very desirable thing, especially if you have not seen a family for some time because you've been in the US since you were a child. There are some things to consider. And again, this is another piece where I would highly recommend you speak with an attorney before you leave, because every time you leave the United States, you expose yourself to some jeopardy that things could go wrong. But on a really basic level, you do need to demonstrate that there's a qualifying purpose to the trip. So that's generally education, some sort of emergency, or something pertaining to like work. So like, for example, people will go to do like volunteer educational trips. Maybe they have a sick relative. Those are very common examples. Like maybe a grandmother, for example, is not doing so well and you want to get there before things go even worse. And are some benefits that come with this too, besides the fact that you're able to finally leave the US and connect with others in another country. When you come back, that is considered a lawful entry, at least here in the Ninth Circuit, which can also have other benefits and other applications, possibly. For example, if you were to marry a United States citizen or lawful permanent resident, it may allow you to process your paperwork here in the United States and not need to travel to a consulate to do that part. Consulates being US Foreign Services offices located outside the country. Again, I would not recommend trying to figure that out yourself, but it's something to be aware of, that advance parole exists. It can be a welcome thing. It can provide a later benefit. And I think it's worth exploring if that's something you're interested in doing. Again, circling back to our conversation about DACA, if you've had interaction with law enforcement or you have an especially involved immigration history, please talk to an attorney before you leave. Even if you are granted advance parole, Customs and Border Patrol still has the right to deny you entry into the United States. And once you're out of the US and you can't get back in legally, your life will be difficult, of course, and it'll cause lots of turmoil to yourself and the people you care about. This is, again, not to say you shouldn't do it, but you should go with your eyes wide open and make sure you're doing it in a way that you, with knowing what the risks are and thinking that something that's wise to do. Again, lots of people have done this, totally doable, but there are risks that you're going to want to consider and plan for before you say, this is what I want to do.
And before we move on, we do have two related questions for our panelists that I think would be great to answer now that the information is fresh. So that first one is, do you only have to prove continuous presence for the initial application or every time you renew?
Very good question. Renewals are often easier than the initial application because you can reuse the initial evidence. So once you've proven presence from 2007 to whichever date you had originally applied, that part's basically good to go. So all you need to do then is supplement by filling in the gap from your first application to the renewal application.
And that second question is, if someone passed away, immediate family member, while advance parole wasn't an option, does that still count as some sort of emergency?
Case by case, if you were to try to make that argument, and Selby, feel free to chime in, you would need to explain, why your presence out of country is necessary. Oftentimes, there are family needs that are created from an unfortunate event like a death, funerals, helping clean up family matters, that sort of thing. That could provide the basis for it. But again, we're getting kind of specific here, and I would definitely recommend you speak to someone before you make that choice.
The only thing I would add is for the first question about having to prove presence is there is a rule now that if you haven't had DACA, you had DACA before, and then it expired and it's been over a year since you had valid DACA, there's different rules that apply that it does include continuous presence. So there are some exceptions that lie within that. And again, I'm going to echo Isaac, it's just any question specific to that, I would definitely contact any trusted attorney.
Yeah, and to build off Selby's point, it's a really good one. It's another common question. So let's say you had DACA, it expired, and then you want to apply again. Is it a new application or renewal? There are very technical rules on this, unfortunately, but basically if you go more than a year, they'll want you to apply as if it's an initial application. Less than a year, there's other rules at play. So sometimes you can do it as a renewal, sometimes you can't. But again, this is a situation where you can't talk. Well, you're going to want to talk to an attorney or an accredited representative who has familiarity with this area so they can kind of steer you down the right path.
And I see there are 2 questions in the chat, Wendy. Is it okay if we address those too? First question here, what are the chances of Border Patrol not letting you back in once you get granted advance parole? I could start with that. It's hard to say, like pinpoint an exact like percentage, but so remember those 3 years I was talking about between 2017 and 2020 when the Supreme Court made the decision, they weren't allowing initial DACA applications. Actually, in addition to that, they were not allowing for advance parole applications at the same time. So advance parole is kind of restarted after 3 years. And maybe a lot of folks on the line now are interested in that because they're considering advance parole. In terms of chances, what's important is that you get advance permission and you follow the guidelines of what immigration, when they approve the application, say you're allowed to do. I've been following several groups, people who share first experiences, folks who they access, so long as they have their advance parole document, to be able to go and come back, go through customs at any port of entry, either if they're driving, let's say at the Bridge of Americas with El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, or if they're getting on an airplane and coming into Los Angeles, Houston, Las Vegas, Atlanta, all the way to Portland. When they go through customs at the airport, so long as they follow their advance parole guidelines, I have not yet heard, since they've reopened this, someone who's been denied. The only challenge that I saw somebody have was they have a very specific timeline that they ask for in advance to be able to go down to Mexico in this case, and then come back. I think it was like a window of about 1 month even. And the person, for one reason or another, stayed longer than what was permitted for them. And so they came back after that window that immigration gave them. And so that was the only one time I saw that someone had some challenges coming back in. But that said, personally, with clients that I've worked with and from all the message groups that I've been following, I've not seen someone who's had similar issues traveling on advance parole. That said, it is still important to check in about factors such as previous trips, even before applying for DACA, entries to the United States, as well as possible criminal matters. Those are the most important things, but there's a lot to it. So I would recommend checking in. And if there's any questions, to really shore it up by meeting with someone to make sure everything is organized before traveling. Isaac, did you want to add anything to that before I go to that next question?
No, I echo what you say, Selby. I think it's a great program. It's often a welcome relief, and most people are just fine. Just be aware that if you do have a criminal history and involved immigration history, that's when you want to talk to someone, because those are the instances I've heard of where things have come up. I have not had the issue with my clients yet, thankfully. But nationally, we all talk, lawyers amongst ourselves, and those are the few instances where I've seen dangers happen, and sometimes they're in store for a little bit of a fight. Other considerations too, which you can talk about with your attorney or your family, is like, where do you want to come back in the US? Certain ports of entry are more friendly than others. And there is a direct flight to the Portland airport. And if you go there, you will go through Customs and Border Patrol in Portland, which is generally pretty favorable. And if you have issues, people can call them directly from here. So all sorts of things to consider. I hope you do explore it, but just go and do it with your eyes wide open.
And we've gotten now 2 questions about how long does it take for advance parole to get approved. Typically, I've seen, it's been a while, but the last one I did was about 5 months, I believe. But it is possible to make an expedited request, which is a little bit more involved. But the purpose of the application is to set like a really broad, my suggestion, date range of when you wish to travel and how long you plan to travel. And just know that if you want to go like tomorrow, that might not be the process. It might not be processed that fast, but just give yourself a lot of flexibility. And what's more important than anything is when it is approved, to really follow the guidelines of what immigration has approved you for, of when you can travel. So my answer to that question is My personal experience with the last one I did previously, that was this year, was about 5 months.
Yeah, ditto. And let's say, for example, you want to go on a trip in the summer to do some volunteer work, like build houses or something in another country. I've had a lot of clients do that, which is great work. You want to start with enough time so you don't run into an issue where people will be leaving without you because you haven't gotten your documents yet. The circumstances Selby alluded to about an expedited application, that's usually for exigent or some sort of emergency situation. So you got to put more work into and explain why your application should be put to the front of the line. So again, just being cognizant of how the system works. If you do have an emergency, you need to demonstrate it, explain it, prove it, and then be prepared to follow up with some phone calls to make sure that they know this is an emergency and you need special attention.
And I just want to, so there was a question in the chat that asked if there's a different price for DACA. I answered it there, but I'll answer it live. Between a renewal application and initial application, the answer is no. The price is the same for either renewal application or initial application. It's $495 USCIS filing fee. So that's $410 plus $85 for the biometrics fee, for a total of $495 for either when applying for the first time or for a renewal application. These are good questions. Thank you for sharing.
More questions later too. I don't want to take up too much time because I think Selby's going to